Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Danny, and I'm the event planner for the New York Reactor. Before we begin, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Useful links will be shared in the chat. This session is recorded and will be available on demand in 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Which brings us to today's session. It will run for approximately 1 hour with times for questions throughout. I will now turn it over to our speakers for introductions.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another session of AKS Labs on the Microsoft Reactor channel. Actually, we're streaming on two different channels today. We're streaming on Microsoft Reactor and the AKS community channel. So if you aren't subscribed to either of those, please head over to each of the channels and make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon so you are notified of any new sessions that pop up. Let's see. It's been 2 weeks since I've been here. And 2 weeks ago, we were doing AKS and Kubernetes fundamentals, where we were learning all about the nitty-gritty details of Kubernetes and kind of following the guidance of the CKAD exam. We were very, very heavy into the kubectl tool, right? And last week, I said that we were going to progress and continue on with the whole Kubernetes and AKS thing, but not, well, I should say, using the least amount of kubectl as possible, right? Because some of you out there may be saying, hey, Paul, Kubernetes is awesome. We know the value that it gives. We understand that using kubectl is probably the right thing to do, especially when you are deep into the weeds with troubleshooting and all that stuff. But what if you just don't have time to learn kubectl right now? What if you just want to get started right away and deploy your application? And so that's what we're going to do today in this session of, it's called Kubernetes the Easy Way with AKS Automatic. So for the folks that are online, welcome wherever you are in the world. It is 8 a.m. for me. I am in the Pacific time zone. And so wherever you're joining from the world, feel free to just comment in the comment section here. And we welcome you to this session. So we're like fresh off the heels of Microsoft Build, and there was a lot that happened at Build. So if you haven't caught up on any of the Build content yet, before I just jump into slides, be sure to head over to the Microsoft Build website. That's build.microsoft.com. And if you're interested, I mean, in any of the sessions really, but if you're interested in like Kubernetes related sessions, just head on over to the session catalog. And then in the search window here, you can just type in Kubernetes or AKS, and you'll see here that the on-demand filter is turned on. And so these are all the sessions that have been recorded. So if you had FOMO, if you weren't able to attend, no worries. You can actually get caught up on all the recordings, both here in this website and on the Microsoft Developer YouTube channel as well. So here we have a ton of sessions, running stateful workload on AKS. This one was particularly fun for myself. I was a late addition to this and got to chat it over here. So go ahead and click that watch now button for that. Debugging, this is a pretty great session as well. And then skip the YAML AKS with automated deployments. That is a session that's heavily, that goes into all the content in that session, goes pretty deep into the things that we're going to do today in this lab. So be sure to catch that session as well. We also actually delivered this lab at Build as well. So if you missed out, no worries. The recording's here, the lab we're going to do today. So let's get on with it. So today what we're going to do is we're actually going to just start by kicking off the sample app deployment. This stuff kind of takes a while, and I do want to help you get started with this lab. There are some prerequisites that need to happen, and so we're going to do that. And then as some of this stuff is being built out on the fly, we'll actually just talk about, what is AKS Automatic. We also have a whole series of AKS Automatic videos on the AKS community YouTube channel, so be sure to go check that out as well. We'll also dive into like automated deployments. This is a huge component of the workshop that we're doing today. And then Service Connector was really cool tool. And then app monitoring. And then from there, we'll start to play with a lot of the AKS related features. And these are features within the Azure Portal that actually enable you to do things that you could probably get away with not using kubectl altogether. So let's jump right in. So for the folks that want to follow along from home, head over to this URL. It is aka.ms/AKS/labs. That will actually take you over to this website. Okay. And I could just post it in the chat window as well, aka.ms/AKS/labs, plural. Labs is plural. And that's it right there. So that will take you over. I'm just clicking it just to make sure. Okay, yeah, that works. Yeah, and feel free if you have any like questions along the way, just post them in the chat window. I'm keeping an eye out there, so I'll try to get to that. Once you're in the workshop landing page, click on this link up here, workshops. This will actually take you over to a whole menu. So we have a whole bunch of workshops available in this website, some of which we're actually going to go through, right, as part of this Reactor series. But today, what we're going to do is you're going to click the Getting Started to expand the menu. And then we're going to do this lab right here, the Kubernetes the Easy Way with AKS Automatic. So let's go ahead and just click on that. And like I said, we're just going to dive right in. We're going to get started, get you all set up, get you rolling, and then we'll talk about some of the features along the way. Okay. So once you're in the lab environment, you can actually click this little button down here. This will actually move the menu item out the way. Is it move or move? I don't know, but it'll move it out the way. Okay. So from here, we can start building, and we have the objectives in the workshop, which is pretty much the objectives that I showed in the PowerPoint slide. And we do have prerequisites. Okay, so to do these labs, you do need to have your own subscription, and so you'll need to bring that. Ideally, you should have VS Code. Not necessarily for this lab, but for other labs, you might need it. For this lab, for sure, you do need a GitHub account as well. And you do need to use well, you don't need to, but it's preferable. You should have the GitHub CLI tool installed on your local machine. Okay. I'm just looking at the chat window. Okay, we got few folks here from NYC. Cool. And then I see Spain and Mexico. Awesome. Oh, and Richmond, Texas. Shout out to Richmond, Texas. Sweet. Yeah, welcome. All the instructions. So pretty much throughout the AKS Labs workshop, all the instructions are written in Bash. So you do need a POSIX compliant shell, whether it's a Bash or ZSH. And so if you're on a Mac OS machine, Bash is there. If you're on a Linux machine, of course it's there. But if you are on a Windows machine, you should use like WSL, or if you have Git for Windows installed, I think there's a Git Bash application that gets installed along with it. So yeah, you can use that, or we could use Cloud Shell. I'm going to show you Cloud Shell today. So that's to get started. We are going to be using some preview features throughout this workshop. And so when you are logged into the Azure CLI, you do need to register some of these preview features. Okay. So we do need the AKS Automatic SKU preview, and then we also need the app monitoring preview feature as well. And then a couple of additional resource providers, Service Connector, and the Microsoft Insights. Okay. And then once that is all set up, then you can actually proceed with this bit right here. Okay, so this might trip people up, and I just want to make sure I call this out. So let's do this. Let's do this. Let's hop on over to the Azure portal. Okay, I'm already signed in. And up here is the Azure Cloud Shell button, that little terminal button. Okay. You click on that, a little shell pops up at the bottom of the screen, and I want bash. Remember, I want bash. So no storage account required. Yeah, that's fine. I don't need a storage account right now. If you want to have persistent files, then you should create a storage account and mount it. But in this case, I don't really care for that. So I'm just going to opt to use just the ephemeral shell. Okay. And then let's see, looking in the chat here, UK represent. Oh, yeah, UK represent. And then I see Prasad share AKS lab link here. Yeah, Prasad, just scroll just like 2 comments up. You'll see the URL for the lab, and you should be good there. Here we go. So we have a Azure Cloud Shell going. And if I jump back over to my instructions, I already have these features enabled, but you can literally just copy this. There's a little button over here. So if you hover your mouse over any of the code blocks, you will see something like this pop up, and you can literally just copy the entire contents of the command, and you can paste it in here, right? And you should see, like, what you want to see is registered. If you're doing this for the first time, it's gonna be a while. I would say anywhere from like 10 minutes to register these preview features. But you want to make sure that these things are registered before you move on. Now, if yours is registering, no problem. This stuff is all recorded, so you can always go back to the recording and catch up from there. Okay, and so that's kind of what I recommend. Just watch along over here. Go back to the recording. Once you're back at the recording, you can hit pause. You can fast forward. You can do whatever you want. So yeah. So these features for me, they're actually registered already. Okay. So and let's just double check this one, the Microsoft Insights and the Service Linker. Let's just make sure those are registered. Oh, okay. So one of them is still registering. No problem. Hopefully by the time we get to that point where we're actually going to use it, it will be registered. So, and this is kind of like what I'm talking about here. So registering is still ongoing. So just be mindful of that. Okay. So once these things are actually registered, you will need to make sure that these features actually propagate over to the Microsoft Container Service provider. This is just kind of like a recommendation right here. I've actually gotten away with sometimes doing this and sometimes not doing that, but just to be safe, you can just run this. Okay. Now, here's the part that might trip people up if you don't really pay attention to it, is we want you to head over to this other section of the website where you actually set up a lab environment. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted to make sure that everybody has these resources when you're doing any of the labs throughout the AKS Labs website. Okay. And so for here, remember we are going to use Azure CLI one more time, and we're going to deploy these resources. And so before I look at that, let's just go ahead and set this up, and then I'll talk about what it is doing. So let's just clear the screen here. I already have it deployed. I just want to show you what this looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of these values. So let's just say ECUS2 is where I want to deploy it. And then let's just call it my resource group 2. We do that, copy that, and set the environment variables. I've already logged in. There's no need to log in when you're in Azure Cloud Shell because you're in the Azure portal already. You don't need to do that. Next thing we need to do is create a resource group over here. So using the resource group name and the location, we are going to create the resource group. Okay, so resource group 2 was created. And then here we're going to deploy Azure resources using an ARM template. Okay, so this will kind of speed up things just a little bit as opposed to writing or running multiple Azure CLI commands. So first thing we need to do is we need to export a couple of more variables. So your user ID, and then set a dynamic or random deployment name. That way we can find this stuff a little bit easier. So we'll go ahead and do that. And boom, 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 boom. Export the username. And then we will export the deployment name. Okay. And then from there, here's where we actually deploy the ARM template. Okay. So let's just clear the screen here, get some more real estate. And here we can see that we are doing we're creating a deployment within a resource group. And this is where we pass in the resource group name and the deployment name. Okay. This long URI here, this is actually the ARM template that we're going to deploy. And then we also pass in my username, or your username in this case, or user ID, I should say. And that's going to be to make any role assignments on some of these resources. So we'll go ahead and deploy that. Notice that there is a no wait flag on this. So we don't really need to wait for it to run within the terminal. It's just all running in Azure. And I can show you what that looks like over here. So if I back up in the Azure portal, if I click on resource groups, let's see, let's just collapse this down just a little bit. And I hit refresh. I should have, no, don't do that. Let's just refresh the page. Refresh. Okay. Where is my resource group 2? AZ account show, AZ group list. I know I have it. It said it create. Yeah, see, so resource group 2 is created. Maybe I just need to do a hard refresh on the Azure portal. So yes, reload. Did I do this in a different subscription? That could be the case. Let's see. I have access to multiple subscriptions. So, okay. Resource groups. Aha. Okay. So let's see. Filter my resource. Yeah. So I put it in a different subscription, which is not what I wanted to do, but that's okay. I'll click on this anyhow. So, oh, wow. You can see all this stuff is already populated. So I have my resource group 2 over here. And if I click on underneath settings, deployment, because remember we did a deployment for the resource group, I can click on that. And you can see here, this is the actual deployment name. Remember, we called it lab demo, and then we gave it some random text at the end. So if you click on that, you can see all the things that are being deployed. And I'll show you that in a second. So yeah, you can see the Azure Managed Grafana is the one thing that's that we're waiting on. So if I scroll up here, we are deploying an Azure Log Analytics workspace. This is to collect logs from any of our deployments. We are also deploying an Azure Monitor workspace for Prometheus. So one is for logs, the other one is for metrics. And then we are also deploying an Azure Managed Grafana to visualize our metrics using Grafana dashboards. An Azure Container Registry. We did this in the previous session, but this time we'll just automatically have it here for you. But the container registry will contain your container images, and it'll eventually be attached to your cluster so that you can deploy container images from there. Azure Key Vault. We're not using it for this particular lab, but this will be here in case you need it for your AKS cluster. And then Azure User Assigned Managed Identity. And the reason for that is because we want to access from our applications. We want to access Azure resources without using any passwords or API keys or whatever secrets. We want to use workload identity. And so this is why this managed identity is over here. If I head over, you can see my deployment is complete. Let me just close down that window and then just go to the overview. And you can see here, I have my Grafana, my Key Vault, my logs, all that good stuff, right? So now at this point, if I go back to the lab environment setup, we did all these instructions over here. We created the resource group. We deployed the ARM template. And now here, once you get to this point, you'll notice like this danger. Some workshops include steps to create an AKS cluster as part of the workshop. Okay. So for this lab only, don't do this part. Okay. So once you get here, stop, and then we'll go back to the previous section. So if I just go back, okay. So now we're back in the AKS Automatic lab, and we just completed the lab environment setup. Okay, so now we could just continue to push forward here. What should we do here? So now this lab, and I'll show you the sample application in a second, but this lab will use Azure Cosmos DB as a backend database. But the ARM template that we deployed doesn't have the Cosmos DB, because not every lab needs a Cosmos DB, and these can get a little costly. So just to kind of like save you on a little bit of cost, we're only going to deploy the things that we need in the lab setup, and then we can actually deploy a Cosmos DB over here. Okay. So what we'll do is we will fire up the Cloud Shell again. And let's see, do I still have my RG name? I don't. So RG name equals my resource group 2. Yep, that's what I wanted. So if I just echo it one more time, okay, so I know it's set. Okay. So what you want to do here is we are going to create an Azure Cosmos DB using basically MongoDB, because the application actually ties into a Mongo database using API version 7, right? 7.0. So we want to make sure that the Cosmos DB supports that. Okay. And then from there, we want to deploy a MongoDB collection, and that collection is called test. Okay. So let's just run that. And then we just let those commands run. Okay. So from this point forward, we should be good to go with the rest of the workshop. So yeah. So it says here now we can proceed with the workshop. I see a question here. AKS Lab need registration. Prasad, no, AKS Labs does not need a registration to actually do the lab. But if you want to join in on actually any future sessions of Microsoft Reactor, there is a registration link here. So this is the Microsoft Reactor website. This is the session that we're on. And then down here is a list of all the upcoming events, right? So we have today is the Kubernetes the Easy Way. We have workload identity coming up. We have a whole bunch of labs coming up. So, and they're scheduled to run all the way through the end of August. And so if you want to be reminded of this stuff, you can register for the series over here on this website. And let's see, can I put this URL in the chat window? I will put it in the chat window. So hang on one second. There we go. So that's the URL to actually register for the series. But the actual AKS Labs content, you don't need a registration for that. All you need is your own subscription. So it's kind of like BYO subscription. Okay. So now we are ready to start deploying an application to an AKS Automatic cluster. Okay. And here, I'm going to show you the sample app. So this is my fork of it. So let me just go over to the actual repo. And I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that into the chat window here. And all this is all in the instructions. So if you're following along, you'll notice all this stuff as well. This is just a sample web application, pretty simple, built with Node.js using MongoDB on the back end, built with Node.js 22, actually. And all it does is it's basically like a fictitious airline booking website, right? So homepage, you can book travel to fictitious destinations, and all that gets saved into a Mongo database. So it's pretty simple in nature, and it's simple intentionally to keep it as to focus on the features of AKS rather than the application itself. So that's all it is. So you do need to fork this repo. And so if I go back to the instructions here, and if you don't already have a GitHub account, you do need to sign up for one. So we can actually, I already have a GitHub account, and you can actually use the GH or the GitHub CLI to very easily clone, fork, or do whatever you need to do with GitHub. And it's a very handy tool that I use often. And good thing for you is that if you don't have the tool installed on your machine, Cloud Shell has a bunch of tools. So there is GitHub CLI over here, so you can actually use that. And so if I jump back to the instructions, so we do ask that you log into your GitHub account, and then you actually fork the Contoso Air repo. I'm not going to do this because I've already done that. But once you fork the Contoso Air repo, you can actually just drop in to the repo, and then you can kind of like set your fork to be the default. Okay. From this point forward, once you have your prerequisite Azure resources stood up, and then you also have the repo forked, we can get started and we can actually just start deploying this application, right? The whole point of this lab is to say, I have an application, I don't have it containerized, meaning I don't have Docker files, nor do I have any Kubernetes manifest. So where do I start? Right? And that's often the question that I get when I'm at like events or talking to folks. How do I get started? Well, this is the way you get started. So what you can do is basically head on over in the Azure Portal, head on over to the search bar, and you can actually just start typing in Kubernetes services, and you'll see this here, Kubernetes services. Click on that, and I'll just close this to get it out the way. And what you can do is you can say create, and you can do this new flow called deploy application flow. What this is going to do is actually going to set up everything for you, including the AKS cluster. So you don't really need to worry about doing those two things kind of like on its own. So what you can do is you can actually click on deploy your application over here. So I click deploy application. And then here, subscription, I think I was in this subscription. So let's see. And I called it my resource group 2. Yep. And I deployed it into East US 2. Yep. Okay. So choose your subscription, choose your resource group, and then choose your region where you deployed it into. Okay. This thing is actually going to deploy a workflow, a GitHub workflow. Or I could create an Azure DevOps pipeline for you as well. But we're going to do GitHub workflow, and it's going to ask you for the workflow name. And I'm going to call it Contoso Air. And here you can choose whether it's going to be GitHub or Azure DevOps. This is actually a new feature that was announced recently for the Microsoft Build Conference. Okay, but we're going to choose GitHub. And if you haven't already done so, you're going to need to authorize your GitHub account over here, because it's going to do some pretty cool stuff on the back end. And I'll show you that in a second. So let's go ahead and authorize access. Okay. Now my GitHub account is actually authorized, and now it can see pretty much all of my public repos. Contoso. So I'll just search for Contoso. Contoso Air is the repo. Remember, I forked it. Contoso Air is the repo that I want to deploy from. And then we should be good to go over here. select the main branch, click next, and now we can move on. So at this point, we're talking about application. What's going on with the application? Do you already have a Docker file, or do you want this automated deployments feature to auto containerize it? So I don't have a Docker file in here yet. I can choose the auto containerize feature and then select over here that I want to save it to a place in my repository. Okay. From here, and I should have showed you this over here. So all my actual code is in the src web directory, right? So this is where all of the Node.js application code lives. And so I'll need to click into the root, click into source, and then right at web, don't click web, check the checkbox, okay? So this right here, you want to check that so that it shows up like .src web. That's what you want, because this is where I want my Docker files to live. I want my Docker files to live with my application code. So I'm going to select. So now we can see that the files will be saved over here. It automatically detected that it's a Node.js 22 application. And just by being Node, it automatically knows that port 3000 is typically the port that the application runs on. If it needs to be something else, you can always type that in. Now for the Docker file build context, I need it to be src web because that's where my Docker file is going to live. Okay. Azure Container Registry, you will need to select your Azure Container Registry, okay? Because remember, we pre-provisioned that. And then for the registry image name, you can stick with the standard name, but I don't like the standard names. I like to make it more personal or make it something that I can remember. And so Contoso Air is what I'm going to choose. So that was containerizing the application. Now, how are you going to get it into Kubernetes? Do you have manifests? If you have them manifests already written, great. You can actually choose them here. If you have a Helm chart, that's cool. You can choose it here too. But what if you don't have any of those? Well, you can actually click the generate deployment files, application deployment files, and it'll automatically generate all that stuff for you, which is cool. It's going to ask you where you want to save the files to. And generally for Kubernetes manifests, I just like putting that in my root directory. So I will just leave it on root, and then I will, oops, that's not what I want. I want that. I'll just check the checkbox on root. We hit select and we're ready to go. And now it's going to ask you a few things about your application. So it's actually configuring scaling as well, which we'll talk about later in the lab. And then it'll also configure a load balancer so that your application is immediately, I guess, accessible from the internet. Okay, we'll just click next. We'll accept the defaults over here. We'll click next. And then here is, we talked about the application. Now, do we have a cluster, right? We don't have a cluster. We're starting from scratch. And so here, I'll just make sure that the create AKS cluster is selected. If you had your own, you can always select and choose your own cluster. But here, we're just starting from scratch. So I'll call it my AKS cluster. That's the name of the cluster. And then the namespace. This is important. If you are following along in the lab instructions, the lab instructions references this namespace called dev throughout. So make sure that you create new and then set that namespace to dev. Otherwise, some of the instructions might break down for you. So I just want to make sure that you are on the happy path there. AKS Automatic does a lot of things for you, just kind of like automatically, which includes setting up authentication and authorization. So your AKS cluster is going to be automatically configured for Azure RBAC. And we talked a little bit about the Kubernetes certificate in the previous session, and how the certificate is really powerful and you kind of maybe don't want to issue that to all your users. And so by using Azure RBAC, it gives you a way to really control who has access to the cluster. Monitoring with AKS Automatic, you get kind of like monitoring out of the box. The only catch is that you should have existing monitoring resources that we can point it to. And so do you remember when we created the, when we deployed the ARM template, it created the log analytics workspace for logging, Prometheus for metrics, That's the Prometheus dashboard. Grafana, right? So for visualizing. And so it automatically detected that I have these resources and just kind of like linked it up and said, okay, for monitoring, we're going to use these resources. So I didn't have to do anything there. So that's cool. If I click next, it's going to kind of validate my deployment, and it's going to give me a summary of what I want to do. So it's going to auto containerize Node.js 22 application, expose it on port 3000. This is going to be where the Docker file is saved. It's also going to give me a Docker ignore file, which is pretty cool. Where do I want to deploy, or excuse me, where do I want to push the container image? It's going to go into my container image registry. And then here for the Kubernetes deployment, it's going to generate automatically a deployment manifest, a config map, a service, right? And then it has all these other features along with it. Here's my brand new AKS cluster. Auto upgrades is automatically set using the Microsoft Entra with Azure RBAC for authentication and authorization, and then the monitoring features. So here you can actually preview a whole bunch of files that it's going to generate. So this is the actual Docker file. Now I will call out this here. Automated deployments, it actually uses draft under the covers, and we explored draft in the previous session. And in the previous session, I also explained draft will help you get started and give you a really simple Docker file template to work off of. This is typically not the best practices baked into it. Most often when you build a container image, you would want to have like a multi-stage container image that will build the application. And then, so that's kind of like the build time, and then actually have another stage for actually running the application, basically using a different base image, which is a lot more slimmed down than the actual building of the application, right? Because when you build, you get all these build artifacts that you typically don't need at runtime. So you want to use this as a base and then kind of like build off of it, okay? And then if I scroll down further, you'll see the Docker ignore file, the deployment manifest. If you've never written a Kubernetes deployment manifest before, you'll be happy to know that this automatically generates it. So that's pretty cool. And then the config map is here. We have a service, and this is the service that will actually expose our application to the web. So now, if I pass validation, okay, validation failed, no problem. If I pass validation, this deploy button will light up blue, and then you would basically click deploy, and then it'll go off and do all the things. It's going to create the cluster in the background. It's going to generate those manifests, save them to your repo. And then at the end, what you should get, and mind you, this deployment takes a while. Okay, so just be mindful of that. It could take anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. We really don't have time to wait on that. And so over here, I have I like pre-kicked this deployment off before we started the session. And so this is kind of like where we would end up. Okay. So you can see here that the AKS Automatic cluster was successfully deployed. Within the cluster, we get a dev namespace. We also get a federated credential for GitHub Actions, because remember, I said this thing will actually kick off a workflow. And then we successfully connected the Azure Container Registry with the AKS cluster. And then we're basically tying off any of the workflow stuff. And then it actually issued a pull request. Okay. So let's go see what this pull request looks like. And before I do that, let's answer any questions here that popped up. So after these sessions, are there any certificate? No, unfortunately, there aren't any certificates granted after you pass or after you go through the lab. This is just more so for your just knowledge in general. And then can we make this automatic deployment of Kubernetes using PowerShell or REST API operations instead of doing the portal? The automated deployment itself, yes, you can. The whole end-to-end workflow that I just showed you, where you're like setting up the automated deployment, creating the cluster all in one shot, That's just a portal thing for now. But you can do things separately. Okay. And I would say with AKS Automatic, these are features that are not just special to AKS Automatic. It's actually available for all AKS clusters. It's just AKS Automatic kind of automates this stuff for you. So hopefully that answers that. So what happens once we've gone through the deployment? Well, it creates this pull request. And so you would actually click on this approve pull request button. It'll take me back over to my GitHub repo. And if I click on files changed over here, I can see all the files that it's trying to commit into my repository. And so let's just collapse all these down real quick because there's a few files in here. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, so let's start with the Docker file. So this is what we looked at. So it's creating the Docker file and it wants to commit that. This is super important right here, the contoso air.yaml file inside of the workflows directory. Okay, so this is the actual workflow. So this is how all the automation happens, not only for this particular deployment, but for any future deployments. So this is cool. So we get a GitHub workflow. Basically, it's going to set up all these environment variables from lines 14 to 28. And then down here, this is the actual deployment. So it's going to be a I guess a multi-stage deployment here. So the first job here is to actually build the image, right? And so it will log into Azure. It will issue this AZACR build image command to build a container image and then push it up to the container registry. And then from there, it will actually deploy the manifest. Let's see, deploy, yes. So deploy, okay. So it's going to build and deploy. Let's go ahead and kick this off because this also takes a few minutes. So I'm just going to click merge. I review the pull request, confirm the merge, and I can delete this branch. I don't really need that branch hanging around anymore. So once this happens, you can actually click on the actions tab in your GitHub repo, and then you should see this going on, right? So the multi-stage workflow build that I talked about. So right now, this is actually building the container image, and it'll eventually push it up into the Azure Container Registry. Okay. So where are we in the lab steps here? So we've set up the automated deployments. We've gone through reviewing of the pull request. We're at the point where we're close to testing the application, right? I mean, we started from nothing. All we had was the application. But we are very close to actually testing the application online. So as soon as that deployment is done, we'll be able to test it. And then just to kind of look ahead a little bit, just to kind of show you what else is involved in this lab, because we're probably not going to get to the very end of this, but let me give you a heads up. So we're going to be troubleshooting the application, okay? The application is deployed, it's running, but it's not quite working yet, right? I told you there's a Cosmos DB involved, actually MongoDB, but the Cosmos DB has support for Mongo API, so you can use that in Azure. And so we've never wired up the application to Azure Cosmos DB. And so in the troubleshooting part of this lab, here's where we're going to actually notice the error and then figure out where that error is and where it breaks down. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about integrating with Azure services. And here we can use a feature called Service Connector to actually wire up the application to the Cosmos DB, right? And so it does a lot for you, Service Connector, and it does so in an automated way. And again, Service Connector is not AKS Automatic specific. It's all of AKS, okay? And so the stuff that you learn here, you can probably take if you already support AKS clusters, you can use it there. Observing your application is a huge deal as well. Once your application is running on AKS, you know, how can you get very granular level details around the metrics, the performance of your application, And so here at this part of the lab, this is where we talk a little bit about using application insights to basically wire up metrics logging for your application. And the special thing here is you can actually wire up metrics for your application without injecting or introducing any new code into your application. AKS has support for app monitoring, which is in preview, and it will actually be able to inject an open telemetry pod into your application for that. And I have slides for this. I can show it to you. So that's kind of like where the remainder of the lab goes. We'll just get through and see how far we get. So let's do this just to kind of reiterate on what we're doing. So that's the URL for the labs. Okay. So while we wait, we might as well look at slides, right? The AKS team, the primary focus right now, or one of the huge focuses, is making sure you have a complete end-to-end support in enabling you to support your applications, right? And so developing, building, deploying, right? That's like the first part. And that's what the automated deployments kind of got us through. And then observing and troubleshooting. I mean, these are all like day 2 operations that you really need to be concerned about once your application is running in an AKS cluster. Okay, so these are the things that that we're focusing on today. And then we have things like shift left security practices, right? Making sure we have best practices in place in terms of security to kind of prevent from any future incidents. Things like not using passwords anymore, not using API keys or tokens anymore. You know, relying on workload identity is a huge part of that, right? And then, of course, AKS. What is AKS, or what is Kubernetes? It's a container orchestrator, highly scalable container orchestration platform. This is why people lean on Kubernetes a lot, especially in this era of AI, right? They want to lean on the resiliency, the scalability, the customization of Kubernetes and the Kubernetes API, right? And then, of course, everything has a cost when you're running it in the cloud. And so being able to provide you with some cost analytics and being able to forecast, you know, how much things are going to cost is like super important. And also chargebacks. Like I know a lot of customers, they run AKS clusters for different departments and they want to be able to charge back their departments. So being able to get granular control, or I guess more granular method in reporting the costs is going to be super helpful, and AKS enables you to do that as well. Okay. We'll go through a few more slides here, and then we'll just check on the deployment in just a minute or two. But AKS Automatic, what is it? How is it different than regular AKS that's been around for years? Well, AKS Automatic enables you to basically have a cluster that is pre-configured with all the best practices, right? A lot of the features, actually all the features in AKS Automatic, these are things that you would typically have to roll or install by yourself, right? Which for some folks, you might want more control. You might want to, you might want to say like, those are great features. I want to do that myself. You can, by all means, you can install the add-ons by yourself. Some folks don't want to roll them by yourselves. And so this is where you would lean on AKS Automatic, and then you can take advantage of things like, the Cilium data plane or the Cilium network policy in the cluster, things like Carpenter, right? Carpenter for node auto provisioning, taking advantage of the Microsoft Entra ID authentication and authorization. These are all great. And then this is super cool too, being able to take advantage of the automatic upgrades, because upgrades are always, let's say, a little challenging. Okay. So these are all pre-configurations of the AKS cluster. And then to talk a little bit about the features that we just played with here. So what we did was we actually used Draft, right? That's the engine that powers automated deployments. That actually created a pull request into our GitHub repo. And right now we're at the point where GitHub Actions is actually running. and it will actually deploy into the AKS cluster, right? So that's kind of like where we're at. The next thing here is Service Connector. We're going to touch on that next. Basically, Service Connector allows you to connect an Azure service, in our case, Azure Cosmos DB, with an application that's running inside of our Kubernetes cluster. If you've done workload identity in the past, you will know that it's a little, I would say a little tedious to set up, right? You do need a managed identity, a federated credential, create a service account in the Kubernetes cluster, and then also grant that managed identity the proper role permissions, which is like, I think last I counted is about 6 or 7 steps to complete. Service Connector kind of like takes care of all that for you. And so it does kind of like the magic behind the scenes that enables that. And if you want us to roll your own workload identity, you can. The session in 2 weeks from now, we're going to cover all about workload identity. So be on the lookout for that. Let's go check on the deployment, see where we are at. So I see a green check mark. I love green check marks. So everything is good. Image is built. It's been deployed. Let's go check on that deployment. So I can actually close this deployment down. It'll take me over into my AKS cluster eventually. There we go. You can see that it is deployed. And now if I head over to services and ingress, I can look for my Contoso Air deployment, which is in the dev namespace. Remember that for this workshop. And then I can actually click on, you can't see here, it's blurred out, but there's a link that I can click. If I click on that link, here it is. This is the Contoso Air website, and I can actually just log in and I can try to book a flight. So log in with my username and password. Secret, there is no username and password. You can type in whatever username and password you want. So just click into it. Just fill in the text box, click in, and then I can actually book. So from this airport to that airport, I want to travel next week. So there we go. And I can go ahead and find the flights. Cool. There's some flight information there. I'm good with the default. I'll click next. And oh no, something's wrong with the application, right? So cannot read properties of null, which is a not so helpful error message. So what we're going to do? Well, we can actually go to application insights to check the container logs to see what really happened. So if I hop over to logs, you'll see the welcome to log analytics, close out of that. And so what we can do is put this in KQL mode. If you aren't familiar with KQL, it stands for Kusto Query Language. This is the language that's used throughout Azure Monitor. And so what we can do here is troubleshoot. So we're at this stage. I can copy this KQL query and boom, 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 boom. I can paste in this query, click run. And it does take a second. So now I see logs from my container. And if I expand this a little bit, you can see right here, Azure Cosmos DB settings were not found, right? It's because we didn't configure that. So we need to do that. And we're going to do that with Service Connector. So I'll bail out of this monitoring, right? And container logs is basically like doing the kubectl logs command. But in this case, you don't need a terminal in kubectl anymore. You can just look at it all right here from the Azure portal. So using Service Connector, okay. I don't know why these are set up here, but anyhow, we'll go ahead and create a new one. So I'll go ahead and click this create button for Service Connector. I'll hit create, and you want to make sure that you deploy your Service Connector for the namespace that your application is deployed into. Okay, so dev is the namespace, and Cosmos DB is a service that we want to connect to, and MongoDB is the API for Cosmos DB that we want to connect into. And look, it automatically detected that I have a database named test. Okay. For client type authentication, or, we're not going to do this right now because the application already has this information in there. And I'll show that to you in a second. We are going to use workload identity for access to the particular resource. And as part of the resources that we pre-provision, my identity is the name of that resource. So we want to use this one right here. Okay. Optionally, if you had Azure app configuration, you can store all these connection information over there. If I expand this advanced tab real quick, you can see here that it's actually going to create a document DB role for that managed identity, right? So these are one of the things that it takes care of for me in terms of workload identity. And then look at all these environment variables that it's going to create just kind of like on the fly. It's going to create these environment variables as a Kubernetes resource so that these environment variables are available inside of my application pod. Okay, so just remember or make a mental note of these environment variable names. I'll click next for networking. This is where you can actually configure firewall rules if your Azure services are behind like private networks or things like that. And then I will click review and create. It's going to do validation of that. And then I should be able to deploy in a second. So boom, 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 boom. Got to wait for this. Okay, validation passed. And then I can just go ahead and click create. And then you can see here up in my bell icon, you can see here that the service connector is creating. Okay, so what we will do is we'll wait for that because that takes a little while. Let's take a look at the source code because I want to show you configuring service connector and having it automatically configure the workload identity is one thing. You do need to make sure that your application is, I guess, developed in a way that it can leverage the Microsoft Identity SDK, because that's what's going to basically make workload identity work. So inside of my SRC web directory, I'll head down over to the repositories directory. Inside of my index.js, you can see here that there is a class set up for book repository. And look at these environment variable names, right? These look familiar because this is actually what Service Connector will also set. And so the code here actually looks for these particular environment variables, right? And it looks for that. It sets it as part of the instantiation of the book repository class. And so if I go to the book repository JS, you can see here that I am using the Microsoft Identity SDK for JavaScript. And then as part of the constructor for the class, I'm actually accepting in these variables, the connection string, the scope, and the client ID. And then I'm basically using that to generate a default Azure credential. Okay. From there, we're going to basically go get basically a connection string from Azure Cosmos DB. And then once we get that connection string, we're going to set that in a variable there. And then we're actually going to use Mongoose, which is a library for MongoDB. We're actually going to pass in the connection string as part of the Mongoose connect method. And so that's how the authentication actually happens behind the scenes, with the key here being that these environment variables are actually set in the application pod. Okay, so that's super important. Let's go over here. Connection is still being created. That's fine. I only have a few minutes left. So what I'm going to show you is this. So if you had a deployment that was successful, what you can do now is click on the actual service connector that was created. You can click on this YAML snippet button. Okay, this is pretty cool. This is actually really cool. Click on the YAML snippet button. And if you've done workload identity in the past, you may know that you need to have a label added to the pod. You need to have a service account added to the pod. And you need to reference in this case, a secret. And that secret's going to contain all the environment variables that we use there. So once you do that, you can actually create or generate, I would say automatically update the deployment manifest. Okay. So here, we were on sample YAML. We don't want sample YAML. We actually want it to deploy into an actual Kubernetes workload. And so we'll select that in the dropdown. And then over here, we want to select the Contoso Air deployment. Okay, so you select that. And now we have the actual deployment that's running in the cluster. And within there, highlighted in yellow again, we should see the edits that it's going to make. So it's going to pass in this label. It's also going to pass in the secret. And then it's also going to pass in the service account name. Okay. Now, I could just click apply, and I will just click apply. But here's a tip. We want all of the manifests basically source controlled. So inside of the GitHub repo. So is clicking apply over here the best thing to do? In my opinion, no, it's not. What this does is it actually tells you exactly where you need to put the YAML YAML manifest edits. Okay. So this tells you exactly where to put them. What I would do personally is I would head over to my GitHub repo and actually put that in source control, commit it, PR, merge it, and then it'll actually go ahead and do the deploy. Okay. That's just my take. But for the purposes of a demo like this, you can actually click the apply button. It'll actually apply it to your actual deployment. And then eventually the deployment will roll out. So if I go over here, roll out. And then if I go down to Contoso Air, you will see that a new pod will eventually be deployed over here. Okay. So once that deploys, you should be able to go back out to the website, go back home, and then relog in, and then you can create another booking. Okay. Let's see, just a quick time check here. I think I am very close to the end of time. So unfortunately, we won't be able to finish this together. But you can continue to follow along in the lab and continue to go through the process. What I wanted to make sure is that you have a proper foundation to start off with, have the resources in place, have the cluster in place, and then you can start performing the rest of the lab tasks. So with that, let's get through the service connector. You will use Azure Monitor for application insights and basically implement the codeless deployment to instrument your application, which is pretty slick. So be sure to tune into that. What's next? Before I get into what's next, let's see. So Giovanni says, if you apply there, does that not cause configuration drift? That is exactly what will happen. And that is exactly why, in my opinion, you shouldn't click apply there. Take the YAML manifest that's highlighted in yellow, right? Just the bits that are highlighted in yellow, put that into your source control or your repo, and then commit, merge, right? Commit and do the PR process there. That way, there is no configuration drift. It's all in the repo. Okay. So that's my advice over there. Okay. Yeah. So that's all I have time for today. Please feel free to go through the rest of the lab on your own. If you have any questions whatsoever, my DMs are always open on LinkedIn. So just search for my name on LinkedIn. Hit me up if you have any questions along the way, or if you want to put a comment in this video, I'll come back to the video like in a day or so and answer any of your questions there. What's next? So next week, there's going to be a deep dive into workload identity. So please tune in for that. We also have a session on event-driven workloads. So these are like scaling with Kata and Carpenter. So that's always cool. And then we have observability with Prometheus and Grafana. So we'll start to dig in deeper into a lot of the features that we're covering in the first 2 sessions here. So that's all I have time for today. I hope this has been helpful. And yes, please do reach out if you have any questions along the way. So thank you for being here, and I will see you on the next one.